Welcome to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of my favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and in this episode we're diving into TellTale Games' The Walking Dead. We're starting with Season 1, Episode 1, and we'll be breaking down the series over the next several weeks. The Walking Dead franchise is one of the biggest to land in the past decade and a half. What started as a series of graphic novels became several TV shows, toys, games, and a truckload of merchandise. The first Walking Dead show aired on October 31, 2010 to critical acclaim. A year and a half later, the concept was brought to the video game space by TellTale Games, with Episode 1 of the Walking Dead game releasing in April of 2012. The game follows a man named Lee, who is on his way to prison after being convicted of murdering his wife and her lover. Right away, you can tell something is up as emergency vehicles and chatter on the radio in the police cruiser drown out the cop in the front seat. Before long, Lee finds himself walking free and trying to navigate a world that's been turned upside down by a zombie virus that causes people to eat each other. The game offers you a ton of decisions throughout, with some having a major impact and others being rather minor. I won't be looking at every choice you have to make in this video, but I will be covering a couple of the big choices and try to figure out what the right thing to do is in each scenario. The patrol car that Lee is being transported in winds up crashing, and after freeing himself from the back seat and recovering the keys to the handcuffs from the dead body of the police officer, he experiences the first sign of something being horribly wrong when the officer comes back to life and tries to eat him. Using a rifle he finds on the ground next to the overturned patrol car, Lee dispatches the officer only to draw the attention of several other zombies who've been hiding in the woods. Lee manages to escape the horde, jumping over the fence into the backyard of a house, eventually finding cover and meeting a little girl named Clementine. Together, they head out in search of help, finding a pair of men, Sean and Chet, who help them escape the area. Making their way out of town, the group ends up at a farm owned by Sean's father, Herschel, and we're introduced to several characters on the farm that will wind up playing a huge role later on in the story. The farm is also where we'll find the first major decision that we have to make. To this point in the story, we've had to make small dialogue decisions. Most of these revolve around either lying or telling the truth, but there's also some smaller choices you can make by choosing who to talk to on the farm and what to actually discuss with them. Eventually, you make your way to Herschel, but your conversation with him is interrupted by a loud noise and screaming coming from the backyard.
Go! I'll get my gun!
Herschel runs to get a gun, and Lee makes his way to the back only to find Sean on the ground near the fence he had been repairing. He's trapped under a tractor and zombies are trying to get to him through the fence. Duck, the young son of one of the other characters you meet, Kenny, is sitting on the seat of the tractor and trying to escape the clutches of another zombie. You've only got seconds to make a decision on who you want to go for. You can try to save Sean, who helped you the day before, or you can save Duck. Who should you save? Let's start by putting ourselves in the shoes of Lee directly. You're standing there, in shock, watching as a young child is being attacked on the one side and a grown man is trapped on the other. The boy already has a zombie pulling on his arm, and the man, while trapped, seems to be in a better situation as the zombies are struggling to get him through the fence. Morally speaking, the age of the characters does make a difference because one is more developed and, in theory, should be able to fight off attackers a little easier. Duck is more helpless in the situation, and the reasonable thing to do would be to save him first. But is there a moral thing to do? The situation is very similar to a triage situation during a major tragedy. Often you have to assess in a few short moments who needs the most help and apply whatever assistance you can to them before moving on. Sometimes, doing that means that the person you didn't treat first doesn't make it. And that plays out here as, after saving Duck, you watch the fence break and the zombies start munching on Sean. In a real-life scenario, you would be left wondering, what if? What if you had chosen to save Sean instead? Kenny shows up to help Duck as soon as you get there, so maybe if you let Kenny save Duck while you saved Sean, they both could have lived. In a video game, though, it's easy to go back and see what the other outcome was. It turns out that there is no way to actually save Sean. Try as you might, you aren't able to free him from the tractor, and he gets eaten as you watch helplessly. And that holds a really powerful message that holds true in real life. Sometimes, you do the right thing. You do what makes the most sense and what seems like the best decision in the moment, and things don't go the way you expected. You can choose to beat yourself up about the choice you made, wondering if another decision would have been the better one, but in reality, you did the best you could with the information you had. It doesn't make the other choice better or the choice you made wrong, it just means that we're human. The choice to save Duck will have a profound impact on the story later on. For now, Herschel kicks Lee and the rest out of the farm, and Kenny offers to give Lee and Clementine a ride to Macon. Arriving in Macon, the group finds the town seemingly deserted, and it's only after trying to get the attention of what looks like a person down the street that they learn just how packed it is with zombies. Thankfully, a couple of new characters come out of nowhere to assist, and it's only a few moments before everyone is safe inside a small drugstore. This is where we meet most of the core group that will be with us for the next couple of episodes. There's Carly, the reporter, Doug, her friend, Glenn, a former pizza delivery boy and cameo from the TV show, Lily, the Air Force admin, and Larry, Lily's father. The initial situation is somewhat tense, with Larry accusing Duck of being bitten, and Kenny potentially coming to blows with him depending on how you choose to handle the situation. After some back and forth, a close call with Clementine finding a zombie in the bathroom, and Larry having an issue with his heart, things settle down and you get the chance to look around and talk to everyone. This is a chance to get to know the others in the group and gain some goodwill by bringing people candy bars you find littered around the store. After gathering backstory on Lee and the others, you wind up going out to save Glenn, who had been scavenging for gas. He's stuck at a local motel and explains he wound up there after hearing the screams of a girl coming from one of the rooms. Clearing some zombies and convincing her to come out of the room she's boarded herself in, you discover that she was hiding because she'd been bitten. She asks for a gun, hoping to end her own life before she turns into a zombie, and you have another moral dilemma. Do you help her out, or do you walk away? It might seem straightforward, just give her the gun and be done with it. But we struggle with this concept in society as we know it. Let's replace the zombie bite with terminal cancer. Say she's someone who's been given months to live, who wants to end things on her own terms. Would you hand her the gun then? You could argue that people have beaten the odds when it comes to cancer. There are cases of people who have been given a few months to live and lasted years. But you could also argue that the zombie outbreak in this situation is still very new. At this point in the story, the group is still convinced the military will show up and save the day at some point, and that a cure will be discovered. So, is it immoral to give her the means to end her life? If you don't give it to her and she dies and comes back as a zombie and eats someone, would it then be your fault? I would argue that the right thing to do in this situation is to let her have the gun and make her own choice. By keeping it from her, you're taking away her free will and causing undue suffering. She wants to go out on her own terms, and she doesn't want to become a monster that might harm someone else. But that isn't even the last big decision of the episode. Returning to the pharmacy, you make your way into the back area to get some medicine for Larry and wind up setting off an alarm that draws zombies to the building like flies making their way to a pile of manure. In the struggle to keep them out, you find yourself standing between Carly on one side and Doug on the other. Carly is struggling to reach the ammo for her gun, and Doug is being pulled out a window by zombies. You have to choose who you want to help, and this time the one that you don't help actually dies. Just like before, there's no right answer here. Going in, you don't know that one or the other is doomed. The best choice, given what you've seen so far, would seem to be saving Doug. Carly has proven she's capable and a great shot, so it's natural to think that she'd be able to break free on her own and save herself. But that isn't the case, and if you do go for Doug, she gets bitten. You could argue, though, that going for Carly makes more sense because she's a great shot and a bigger asset to the group than Doug in a lot of ways. And that brings up an interesting concept. Morality and ethics are based on society and what we value. In a situation like a zombie apocalypse, the values and what is important to the individual group might differ greatly from what we presently value. Doug has shown he's intelligent, helping Lee to get the keys to the pharmacy at one point. But in a situation where you need someone who can shoot more than someone who can program a computer, it makes sense to save Carly over Doug. Carly reveals at one point that she knows who Lee is. She knows he's a convicted murderer, but she also says something that stands out.
I paid attention to that trial. Maybe you're a murderer, but I don't really care. Frankly, that's a skill that might come in handy.
And that shows the shift in what is acceptable and considered moral or ethical. Had Lee escaped from the police cruiser and been on the run from the law in a normal circumstance, Carly would have assumed the worst on seeing him and called for help. But in a situation where all the norms of society have broken down, where the dead are rising and eating the living, what is acceptable has changed. By the end of episode 1, the group finds themselves in the motel from earlier. They're trying to figure out the next steps, making plans to fortify the motel and hold out until the military comes to save them, when the power goes out and everything goes black. While the choices in episode 1 might have seemed difficult at times, the choices in the coming episodes just keep getting tougher. The next episode in particular is a doozy, and we might even be inviting the Donner Party for dinner. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of my favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and in this episode we're diving back into TellTale Games' The Walking Dead Season 1, this time getting into Episode 2. In case you missed Episode 1, I've linked a playlist for the series in the description below. As I continue to break down episodes, I'll add them to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 2 is titled Starved for Help, and we pick up 3 months after the end of Episode 1. The group has been living at the motel, having fortified it and established a routine to keep everyone safe and alive. At some point over the time jump, the group has welcomed a new member, Mark, who had been surviving in a bunker stocked with food. That food has run out, and the episode opens with Lee and Mark walking through the woods hunting for something to eat. We learn through dialogue that Kenny and Lily have been fighting a lot, and there's a lot of discord in the group because of that. Things are at a breaking point, and they are in desperate need of something positive. Just as they are contemplating shooting a blackbird, a scream breaks the tranquility. They rush toward the disturbance, worried that it might be Kenny, who's been hunting nearby, and wind up discovering a group of 3 men not far away. One of the men is lying on the ground, and it quickly becomes clear that he stepped in a bear trap. The group appear to be affiliated with some local school, and the 2 who are standing refer to the man trapped as their teacher while begging for help. A check of the trap reveals the mechanism used to unlock it has been disabled, and there is only one way to free the man. To make matters worse, the man screaming has attracted some zombies, and you only have a few seconds to make a decision. Do you free the man or let him die? Freeing him means cutting his leg off, but leaving him to die would almost be worse. Is there a morally right thing to do in this circumstance? On the surface, it's actually pretty straightforward. Cutting his leg off and carrying him back is more humane. Letting the zombies rip into him, slowly killing him, would amount to allowing him to be tortured. Not to mention, losing a leg is often preferable to losing a life. When you look at a system like secular morality, where the goal is to maximize human well-being, cutting off the leg becomes an even clearer choice. The best outcome in the scenario would be to get him back to the motor inn and help him recover over time. But we also need to consider the group in our calculations. Bringing a man with a freshly amputated leg back means using medical supplies and food on a complete stranger. Those supplies are very limited as it is, and someone in his condition would undoubtedly use much more than the group was ready to give up. Maybe he'd recover enough in the long run to be an asset to the group, but in the short term, he might use something that winds up hurting the group as a whole. What if Clementine got hurt, for example, and Lee was unable to save her life because they were out of something? In the heat of the moment, those kinds of thoughts would probably escape most people, though. A man's life is at stake, and the instant reaction is to do what needs to be done. Of course, we also have the ability to play out each scenario in this game. Cutting the man's leg off, the group rushes back to the motor inn. As they are leaving the area, though, one of the boys trips over a rock and winds up eaten by zombies. So Lee, Mark, and Kenny arrive back at the motor inn with Ben, one of the students, and the other man, David, who is missing one leg. Kenny's wife, Katja, gets to work on the man in an attempt to save his life as Kenny and Lily argue about bringing him back in the first place. That argument winds up centering around food, and after a lot of back and forth, Lily hands the day's rations to Lee and tells him to figure out who gets to eat that day, so he can see what it's like to make the difficult decision. Who you choose to feed doesn't really make a huge difference later on, but it can be rather tough to pick 4 people out of the group of what is now 10 to feed. This isn't so much of a moral dilemma as it is a nutritional decision, but it does make you think about how you might go about distributing rations in a similar situation. Nutritional guidelines vary by person, of course, but generally speaking, most people need at least 2,000 calories a day to maintain a healthy weight. The options for food on this particular day include half an apple, a piece of beef jerky, and 2 crackers and cheese snack packs. Half an apple amounts to about 40 calories, the beef jerky would be about 80 calories, and the crackers and cheese packs would be about 180 calories each. None of those would even come close to the recommended daily intake, which is a big part of why tempers are so high in the group. Hunger makes people do some crazy things and act irrationally. When you're done handing out the food, Katja calls you and Kenny over to let you know that David didn't make it. As her and Lee are discussing what to do with Ben, David grabs her from behind and starts trying to eat her. Lee manages to help her escape, getting in a physical fight with David in the process. Carly winds up shooting David, and the group erupts into chaos as they assume Ben had concealed the fact that David was bit before winding up in the bear trap. And that is when Ben reveals that someone doesn't have to be bit to come back as a zombie. Before the group can even process what they've learned, they are interrupted by a pair of men emerging from the woods across the street from the motor inn. But before we move forward, we should look back at what happens if we don't save David. What if we chose not to bring back a man with a missing leg? As it so happens, the scenario plays out pretty much the same, with one change being that instead of a man with one leg, you're bringing back a man with a gunshot wound. Ben's classmate Travis, who was eaten as you escaped with David, winds up fighting Mark for a gun, shooting himself in the process. They bring him back to camp instead of David, and everything plays out the same from there. No matter who you bring back, you wind up with Carly pointing her gun at a pair of strangers. They're holding a gas can and talking about how they're just looking for gas for their generators. They say they own a dairy farm a few miles away and that it's protected by an electric fence. The group seems a little too eager to believe this story, but that could easily be explained by the hunger they've been experiencing. Here's 2 men offering food to the group in exchange for some gas, and with how long it's been since anyone at the motor inn had a decent meal, it's no wonder they would jump to accept the offer. Let's just take a second to look at the situation rationally, though. The group has been vocal about needing food. They were just arguing amongst themselves about that very thing. And like magic, a pair of men come out of the woods with offers of food and shelter? While it does make sense the group wouldn't be acting rationally on an empty stomach, it does stick out and seem unrealistic that not a single person would point out how fishy the situation was. Even Lily and Kenny agree on going, and that says a lot considering how much they seem to hate each other. Lee, Mark, Ben, and Carly are selected to join the men, Andy and Dan St. John, and the group makes their way to the dairy farm. Along the way, they chat and get some more backstory on Lee, as well as some information about the farm. We are also introduced to a group of bandits, watching a pair of them argue before one kills the other. The bandits will play into the story more later on. That interaction aside, the group finishes their journey and they arrive at the farm to find the friendly face of Brenda, Andy and Dan's mom. She's offering them a basket of freshly baked biscuits and seems overly joyed to be meeting new people. Carly and Ben wind up returning to the motor inn, with plans to send the rest of the group, while Lee and Mark stay behind to investigate the farm. The whole situation seems too good to be true, and it starts to unravel as Lee and Mark are attacked by the bandits from earlier while clearing zombies from the electric fence on the edge of the property. Mark is hit by an arrow in the shoulder, and the two barely get away with their lives. The rest of the group arrives just in time to see Mark stumbling back to the house with Lee in tow, and they actually start questioning if the farm is actually safe. The St. John brothers reveal they've been having some trouble with the bandits, but they assure the group that it will be handled. After another chance to look around, Lee goes with Dan to scout the area they think the bandits might be holed up in. This is where you have another big decision, and where the mystery of what's going on deepens. The pair find what appears to be a small camp, which Dan says is definitely the camp of the bandits, and while looking around, Lee finds Clementine's hat under a pillow in the tent. Before he can fully process what he's found, a woman's voice breaks the silence, telling him not to move.
The hell?
Don't you fucking move.
Shit!
Put your guns down.
The woman is standing on the edge of the camp, pointing a crossbow at Lee, and before long, both Lee and Dan have their rifles trained on her as she seems to be rambling about the bandits and the St. John's. There are multiple chances to shoot her as she talks, but should you take a shot? If she wanted to kill you, she could have easily done so without saying a word. She chose to speak up and talk rather than shoot. The camp was likely hers, with that being reinforced by a photo in the tent, and she really had every right to threaten the strange men rummaging through it. It's clear she's been through some sort of trauma, and while she seems unhinged, she's also rational enough to know that killing either Lee or Dan would result in her being killed as well. Dan seems to think she's part of the bandit group, but the way she talks seems to rule this out as she alludes to the bandits having taken her daughter, as well as food and supplies. She threatens the men on multiple occasions, upping the threats but never firing her crossbow. Killing her after all she's been through might almost seem like a mercy. She seems to be extremely unstable and distraught, but the fact that she hasn't taken her own life through it all hints that she wants to come back from the terrible things that have happened. You could make the argument that she was trying to get the men to shoot her by ratcheting up the threats, but she could have accomplished that just by firing at one of them, even missing on purpose if she didn't want to hurt them. It's almost like she was pleading for help without saying it. Just like the decision earlier about whether to cut David's leg off, this one seems pretty clear-cut. Not shooting her would be the right thing to do. Showing some compassion and maybe even trying to help her recover from all the trauma she's been through would make the most sense from a moral perspective. Unlike earlier, though, you don't get to decide her ultimate fate. Dan winds up taking a shot, putting a bullet in her forehead right as she is mentioning something about the farm. He says he did it because she was going to shoot one of them, but the timing of it raises some questions and deepens the mystery. What was she going to say, and why didn't he want you to hear it? Getting back to the farm, you have another chance to look around, and you find out Kenny and Lily have been arguing again. This time, the argument seems to revolve around whether the farm is actually safe, and if the St. John's are hiding something. They seem to agree that something suspicious is going on, but while Lily just wants to let it go, leaving after a good meal, Kenny wants to snoop. This is the first chance you have to explore the barn, and upon talking to Kenny, you're introduced to a locked door in the back of it. He says Andy was locking it up as they came in, and that he seemed to be acting very shady about it. With a little investigation and some subterfuge, you manage to get the door open and discover a butcher's room complete with saws and blood everywhere. Andy catches you snooping and explains the whole thing away as nothing more than a place where they butcher and clean animals that they've hunted down. As easy as that explanation is to accept, it still seems a bit odd that they would be so secretive about it. Finally getting into the house for dinner, Lee is told he can wash up in the washroom down the hall. Before he can wash his hands, though, an odd noise and an extension cord going up the stairs draws him to investigate the second floor. The extension cord leads to a closet, and inside you find some medical supplies and waste, including IV tubes and saline. That wouldn't necessarily be the weirdest thing, as those supplies could come in handy if needed, but the extension cord going into a small hole in the wall does seem odd. Going into the bedroom near the closet, you find a bookcase that can be moved aside to reveal a door. Behind that door is where the whole situation breaks open. Mark is lying on the floor, both his legs missing. He's alive, though barely, and he tells Lee not to eat dinner. Putting two and two together, Lee rushes downstairs to warn everyone. A few people have already started eating, and Clementine is in the process of taking a bite when you burst in. You only have a second to stop her, and the next few moments are chaos as you reveal what you found, and the St. John's admit everything. It turns out that in addition to the fresh fruits, vegetables, and cow's milk they've got on the farm, they've also been eating people. And this is where we dive into a moral dilemma that's at least as old as mankind itself. Is eating your own species morally acceptable? The most famous example of this dilemma comes from 1846. A group of pioneers heading west through the Sierra Nevada mountains became stuck in a snowstorm. They didn't have nearly enough food to survive more than a few weeks, and it wasn't long before members of the party began dying from exposure to the elements and starvation. In a desperate moment, several members of the Donner Party decided that eating those who had died was better than starving to death. At one point, they even murdered 2 of the Native American guides that were with them to eat them as well. Let's set aside the ick factor for just a minute, as I'm sure the vast majority of people would say that eating another human being is disgusting as a concept. Most people would probably even say that they would never consider it. But starvation makes you do things you wouldn't think possible. Remember the calories we talked about earlier? Those calories help you move, work, and think. Not getting enough of them means your body starts to break itself down, and the part of your brain responsible for rational thought starts shutting down as well. From an article on eating disorders, linked in the description below, comes the following. When a person is malnourished, their brain is not adequately fueled. They struggle to make decisions, solve problems, and regulate their emotions. This means that decisions you wouldn't make on a full stomach might seem a little more rational when hunger sets in. So, maybe hunger drives you to consider eating your fellow survivors. Is that decision moral? Strictly speaking, from a secular morality standpoint, eating a person who had passed away from natural causes to sustain yourself and hopefully make it through a bad situation wouldn't be immoral. In fact, in the drive to maximize well-being, it would be the right thing to do. If you're on the verge of starvation, about to die, any nutritional value at all would be important. But does the human body offer enough nutrition to make it actually good for you? According to an article from the Smithsonian Magazine, also linked below, a study of the caloric value of the human body showed it isn't really worth eating over the long term. The study was primarily looking at cannibalism in early humans and trying to determine the cause, with the conclusion being that it was most likely more ritualistic than anything else. The average human body contains around 125,000 calories, which seems like a decent amount, but it wouldn't really be enough to sustain more than a couple of people for very long when compared to something like a cow that averages 700,000 calories in total. So, while eating a person might help you get through to a time where better food is available, it isn't something where keeping people to eat makes any sense. And that brings us back to the St. John's. We're never really given an origin story for the cannibalism, but it's made very clear that they have plenty of food on the farm. The cow provides fresh milk that can be turned into butter and made into other things like cheese, and they have crops growing as well. And that begs the question, what drove them to eat people? Surely, there's still wildlife to hunt. We see a rabbit at the start of the episode that was being eaten by a zombie, and there has to be a lake or stream with fish in it not too far from the farm if they want meat. Why start eating people in the first place? But let's assume they went through something that drove them to that point. Now they're in a position where they're keeping people alive to eat. Mark had an arrow in his shoulder, something he could have easily recovered from. But they cut off his legs and made an extra effort to keep him alive so they could finish him off later. They've crossed the line from doing something socially unacceptable to survive and moved into straight up murder. We even have to call into question if they targeted the group for this in the first place. Did they really need gas for the generators? Or was it all a ruse just to get them back to the farm so they could be slaughtered one by one? Getting back into the moment in the dining room, an argument breaks out and guns are drawn before Lee is knocked out by one of the brothers. When he finally wakes up, he finds himself locked in a storage cooler with Lily, Larry, Kenny, and Clementine. Larry is pounding on the door, furious at being held hostage, and Kenny is pacing the room, worried about Katja and Duck, who the St. John's are holding hostage somewhere. The situation would be bad enough, but then Larry suffers a heart attack. And now we find ourselves stuck with another decision to make. Lily is trying to perform CPR, and Kenny is saying that they need to make sure Larry won't come back and eat them. As Lee, you have to decide whether to help Lily try to save Larry, or help Kenny ensure the old man is dead. The obvious choice here is to help Lily save her dad. Larry's heart might have stopped, but performing CPR could get it started again. But Kenny can't be convinced, and he winds up throwing a massive block of salt on Larry's head as you start chest compressions. Even through all of that, the group makes it out of the cooler, and it's only a few short moments before you have the next set of moral choices to make. First, you have to decide whether to kill or spare Dan. There's a brief struggle with him before he steps into a bear trap that he'd been setting up in the barn, and Lee winds up standing over him, pitchfork in hand. Killing him might feel like getting revenge for Mark, but is it the right choice? A few minutes later, you find yourself in a similar situation with Andy. What should you do? Our society typically looks at revenge as punishment. Locking someone up in jail or executing them in an official way is having them pay their debt to society. But in reality, those actions don't actually do anything positive. If the threat of punishment worked as a good deterrent, then no one would ever commit any crime, or at least it wouldn't be as common. Punishment only serves to make victims feel better, and it doesn't even really do that in the long run. If we look at it from that perspective, punishing the St. Johns by killing them doesn't really do anything positive. What it does do, however, is prevent them from hurting others in the future. But, in this circumstance, it's also adding blood to Lee's hands that doesn't need to be there. The farm has fallen, the matron is dead, killed by a reanimated Mark in the house, and zombies are crawling all over the place. They aren't going to survive long enough to harm anyone else as it is, so killing them with your own, Lee's, hands isn't worth it. Leaving the chaos of the farm behind them, there's one more moral choice to make. The group finds a car filled with supplies just sitting in the woods. The keys are in the ignition, the dome light is on, and one of the doors is open. You have to decide whether to take the supplies or not. Taking them could mean dooming someone else to starving or worse. On the other hand, if the owner of the car is no longer among the living, then they are free to whoever gets them first. Morally speaking, the supplies don't belong to you, but as we discussed in episode 1, the rules of the world have changed. What would be considered stealing in our modern world would be considered necessary to survive in a world overrun by zombies. Living in a time where every morsel of food and drop of medicine is precious, isn't leaving your supplies unattended just asking for someone else to come along and take them? I would argue that the right thing to do would be to leave the supplies, or at least back off and wait to see if anyone comes back to them. If someone does show up, you could perhaps barter with them. No matter what you decide, the group as a whole goes their own way and takes everything. As the episode ends, we discover a recording on a camera Lee had discovered at the supposed bandit camp earlier, with the woman Dan shot recording a video of Clementine and talking about the bandits. In the next episode, we'll find out just what meeting and dealing with the St. Johns meant for the future of the group, and we'll see just how Kenny responds when his family faces a crisis. He was rather quick to make sure Larry didn't come back from the dead, but is he consistent with that judgment? Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of my favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and in this episode we're diving back into TellTale Games' The Walking Dead Season 1, this time getting into Episode 3. In case you missed the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 3 is titled The Long Road Ahead, and we open with Lee and Kenny sneaking into Macon to gather whatever supplies might be left in the town after the first few months of society's collapse. There's some brief conversation between them referencing the state of things following episode 2, ending with Lee standing on the hood of an army jeep as Kenny offers him a hand up. But Kenny's still suffering the effects of being shot, and he winds up dropping Lee before the two are interrupted by the screaming of a girl coming from a building down the street. As they watch, the girl runs out in the middle of town, dragging a group of zombies to her. At this point, you're offered the first big choice of the episode. You can choose to shoot the girl, who we see get bitten and we know is going to die either way, or you can leave her to the dead. Kenny argues that she's dead anyway, and urges you to leave her, but what is the right decision morally? As we've discussed in prior episodes, what we might consider right in this situation in our present day isn't necessarily right in the new world our characters find themselves in. Morality is dependent on society and the rules we choose to live by, and it's important to look at the whole picture. On the one hand, she's suffering and will suffer even more if she isn't killed prior to being eaten. This is very similar to the question from episode 1 about whether to hand the girl in the motel a gun, but there's a twist on this occasion. Ending her suffering would mean that the zombies would turn their attention to Lee and Kenny. who need the extra time the girl being alive would provide to gather supplies for their group. Not only would her screaming stop, but the gunshot would bring the dead straight to the men, severely hindering any chance they would have in searching the drugstore in relative peace. In a way, the situation is a version of something known in philosophy as the trolley problem. Picture a set of train tracks that diverge in a fork. Down one set is a group of people tied up, and down the other is a single individual also tied up. A train is approaching the fork, which is currently set to send the train toward the group of people, and you have the chance to flip a switch that would send it down the other set of tracks. Do you flip the switch? If you kill her, you likely won't be able to gather enough supplies to keep the group going, meaning someone else could die. Letting her suffer could very well be the difference between someone like Clementine living or dying. Getting into the pharmacy, you find a decent load of supplies. The girl's screams stop after a few moments, but she provides enough time for you to get what was left and get out, barely escaping the dead and making it back to the motor inn. Getting back, there's another argument between Kenny and Lily, mainly focused around whether to stay at the motel or leave. Near the end of that scuffle, Lily reveals that someone has been stealing supplies, and you are tasked with finding out who it was. Even as he's becoming a detective, though, Lee is also faced with whether to reveal his past to the group when Carly pulls him aside and suggests that he tell people he cares about the most. She reasons they will find out eventually, as Larry likely told Lily, and that the truth could spill out at the worst possible time. The best thing to do is tell the majority of the group, Kenny, Katja, Lily, and Clementine, about your past as a convicted murderer and hope for the best. The last thing you want is to be in the middle of an argument and have Lily throw it out as a shock to everyone else. Whether you choose to tell people or not, you still have to talk to everyone and look around camp to figure out what happened to the missing supplies. A broken flashlight leads to a chalk X on one of the outer walls, and eventually you discover some of the supplies hidden in a grate outside the walls. As you're telling Lily what you found, a group of bandits take the group hostage and demand you cough up what they consider their property. A gunfight ensues, zombies come out of the woods, and you finally pile into the RV that Kenny's been repairing and smash out of the motel parking lot into the open road. As the adrenaline of the escape is still flowing, Lily starts accusing people in the group of stealing supplies, honing in on Carly and Ben as the likely culprits. The situation doesn't seem like it could get any more tense, but when Kenny runs over a zombie, bringing the RV to a stop, it escalates as Lily calls for a vote on who to kick out of the group. Before the vote can happen, and as Kenny is finally breaking the stuck zombie free from the axle, Lily pulls out her gun and shoots Carly point blank. And now you're forced to make another choice. Do you take Lily back into the RV with the rest of the group, or leave her behind? What she's done is clearly murder, but how is what she did different from what Lee has done in his past, or what Kenny did to Larry? It all boils down to lines we choose to draw as a society. What Lee did was in the past, well before he knew anyone in the present group. He'd been convicted, and was on his way to live out his sentence when all hell broke loose. It could even be explained away as a crime of passion, and he has shown himself to be an asset rather than a danger to the group. It's also likely the whole experience gives him a different perspective on things in this new world than others might have. He realizes what he did was wrong, showing remorse in conversations with others over the series, and he wants to be a better person. Kenny killing Larry could be considered murder, but it would be seen more as trying to protect the group from a threat. Larry might have been dead, all signs pointed to that fact, and the action of smashing his head could easily be justified given the risk to those in the cooler if he reanimated. Lily pointed her gun in the face of an unarmed woman in the heat of an argument and pulled the trigger. It could be seen as the action of a person who'd been through a lot mentally, who'd finally broken under the stress of the situation, but that just makes it worse. Lily has been trying to make herself out as the leader of the group. She's been looking out for them on the whole, even keeping her own count of supplies to monitor what she suspected was someone stealing them. But she's also been unhinged and seemingly picking fights with Kenny constantly. Kenny isn't innocent in the situation, but a stable leader wouldn't have been falling for his bait when he started arguments. Even before her dad died, she was a loose cannon, and seeing her shoot Carly unprovoked just shows how far she spiraled. The right solution would have been to talk things out after the edge of escaping the motel had died off. While the initial impression was that someone was stealing supplies, there were other possible explanations, and cooler heads might have figured things out. Part of figuring out how society, how our group, works in this new world is pushing boundaries and finding out where our personal lines are. A stable society is one where a group of individuals agree on what is allowed and what goes too far. Kenny walked up to the line by dropping the salt block on Larry's head, but Lily crossed it by shooting Carly. Lee, Kenny, and Katja are the three members of the group that must decide that line, with Lily being the one whose future is at stake and Ben being too new to the group to be a part of the decision. Kenny is clear on his thoughts, and a discussion with Katja later on reveals she agreed with the decision to leave Lily behind.
Would you have left Lily back there? On the side of the road like that?
Yes, Lee.
Yeah?
We have to have lines. Yes, I would have left her.
And that gets to one of the biggest problems with the group to this point. They haven't been a cohesive community. They've been a group of individuals with different ideas and values just trying to find a way to survive in a world that's been turned upside down. Kenny and Lily have both been trying to force the group to go the way they want, and everyone, including Lee, has been forced to take a side. In order for things to get better, they have to learn to get along, and their moral system and values need to line up. Climbing back into the RV, with or without Lily, the group starts moving again, and Kenny and Katja reveal to Lee that Duck was bitten in the escape from the motor inn. They both seem to be in a state of denial about what's going to happen, and it seems like things can't really get any worse. You have to tell Clementine about Duck being bitten, and after one of the nicer moments of the episode, where you get the chance to just slow down and converse with her, Lee falls asleep and has a nightmare before waking up to hear Kenny saying that the road ahead is blocked. The blockage turns out to be a train, and after looking around and meeting one of the best characters in the entire series, Chuck, you're able to get the train moving. Things seem to be looking up as the group barrels towards Savannah in a 200-ton steel behemoth. But the reality of Duck's bite finally sets in for Katja, and it isn't long before you find yourself trying to get Kenny to stop the train and face something that's truly unstoppable. As a parent myself, I've been in some tough situations with my kids. Recently, I even had to face the possibility of losing one of them due to illness. The thought of burying a child is more than most parents can bear, and to be in the shoes of Kenny and Katja, knowing what would need to be done to end Duck's suffering and make sure he didn't come back, would be more than most could handle. As Lee, you have the option of easing at least some of the burden by offering to end Duck's life. This whole sequence is one of the saddest of the season, and it gets so much worse when your talk with Clementine about what's about to happen is interrupted by a gunshot in the woods and Kenny's screams. Rushing out, you find Kenny hunched over Katja's body, as Duck lays at the foot of a nearby tree. Katja couldn't live with losing her baby, especially in that way, and she ended her own life. And this is where the title of the episode, The Long Road Ahead, really hits. In the span of about 24 hours, the group has lost their home, Carly is dead at the hands of Lily, who's been left to die herself on the road, Duck was bitten, Katja dies by her own hand, and finally, Lee has to decide whether to kill Duck or have Kenny do it. Unwilling to put Kenny through something even harder than losing his wife and son at the same time, I chose to have Lee shoot the boy. Getting back on the train, the next little bit of time is passed by talking to Clementine and Chuck, and teaching Clem to shoot and deal with a bad haircut. Between all of that, Ben, who's been extremely disconnected from the events since Lily was kicked off the RV, admits to Lee that he was the one who'd been stealing supplies and giving them to the bandits back at the motel. In context, that means that he is responsible for the deaths of at least 3 people, either directly or indirectly. You can choose to threaten him, but for the time being, there is no choice to kick him off the train or out of the group. He does say that he was only providing the supplies to the bandits because he thought they had his friends, but that wouldn't really be much consolation to Kenny at this point. The obstacles aren't all cleared, however, as a tanker truck hanging from a bridge brings the train to a halt once more, and we meet two new people, Omid and Krista. We'll learn more about them as time goes on, but for now they help the group cut the tanker down and clear the tracks just as a horde of zombies appears. The train gets moving just in time to keep the group alive, and as the episode draws to a close, we can see Savannah in the distance. But the city might not be all it's cracked up to be, and the voice of a man breaking through on Clementine's walkie-talkie lends a rather foreboding feeling as we fade to black. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of my favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and in this episode we're diving back into TellTale Games' The Walking Dead Season 1, this time getting into Episode 4. In case you missed the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 4 is titled Around Every Corner, and we open on the deserted streets of Savannah, Georgia. Lee, Clementine, Ben, and Kenny are joined by newcomers to the group, Krista, Omid, and Chuck, as they traverse the city on their way to the docks in hopes of finding a boat. Clementine's walkie-talkie is secured to Lee's belt, following the mysterious voice that poured through it at the end of the last episode, and it's clear she's anxious to get it back. Omid is suffering a lot of pain in his leg, having broken it trying to jump on the train, and the group is contemplating whether to stop or not when a church bell above rings out. Lee briefly spots someone fleeing the bell tower before the voice of a man once again echoes from the radio.
If I were you, I'd get out of the street now.
Before the group can figure out what's going on, Chuck utters what might be my favorite line in the series.
Ask not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee.
The John Donne reference is calling out a horde of zombies brought to the area by the bell, and the group goes into panic mode. After a brief scuffle where Lee saves Kenny's life and Chuck saves everyone by distracting the horde, the majority of them make it into the backyard of one of the houses. The only one left out is Chuck, and his fate will remain a mystery for a bit. There's some question about who is ringing the bell and who was on the radio, as Lee and Kenny hadn't told anyone it was working again, but all of that has to wait as Omid has reopened the wound in his leg. They need to get inside quick, but the house is locked up tighter than Fort Knox. Looking around reveals a locked doggy door that is only useful after digging up the dog that it was likely installed for, and it isn't long before everyone is inside. Lee investigates the downstairs while Kenny and Ben go up, and Ben's frantic voice as Lee finishes checking the last closet brings us into the attic, where Kenny is facing down the memory of his son in the form of a child zombie. And this is the first real choice to be made in the episode, as you can either have Kenny end the boy's suffering or do it yourself. In a world where therapy and psychologists are in short supply, this might be the closest thing that Kenny can have to some kind of closure. He feels like he let Duck down. He blames himself for his son being bitten, and he thinks he's a failure for not having the strength to shoot him before he turned. Logically speaking, Kenny wasn't at fault for what happened, and he isn't weak for being unable to shoot his own flesh and blood. But logic has a funny way of hiding when you need it the most. Having Kenny shoot the boy in the attic and put him out of his misery is the first step in what will be a long healing process. Lee goes into the backyard to bury the child, and this is where we get the first glimpse of the stranger. The dark figure of a man can be seen standing at the fence near the back of the property, and as Lee runs over to confront him, the man takes off. The possible threat renews Kenny's drive to get a boat, and he and Lee decide to head down to the docks before they lose too much more daylight. And it's here where I want to talk a little about this plan of Kenny's. For starters, he wouldn't be the only one with the idea of getting a boat. There's a lot of people out there who think that getting into the water would be the best way to avoid being eaten, but it's not really as great when you start to pick the concept apart. Leaving from Savannah, the group would be heading at least partially into the Atlantic Ocean as they make their way down the coast, presumably to Florida, where Kenny is from. They would need to have a decent supply of food and water on board, as finding places to stop and stock up would be difficult, and they would need plenty of fuel for the journey, as that will be even scarcer along the way. let's assume they want to get to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Kenny's former home. That trip down the coast would total about 400 miles. Assuming the boat gets around 5 miles per gallon, pretty average fuel economy for a boat, they would need about 80 gallons of fuel just for the trip. There would be a lot of large population centers along the way where they could potentially stop and scavenge, but that would be risky as coming ashore also means coming close to potential hordes that could overtake them. Food might be a little easier, supposing they could use Kenny's experience as a fisherman to catch something to eat, but even then they face the age-old problem that plagued pirates: scurvy. When the human body doesn't get enough vitamin C in it, it has trouble producing collagen, a protein that helps keep your bones, skin, and blood vessels healthy. Vitamin C comes mainly from fruit and veggies, and a diet of mainly fish isn't going to give them what they need to survive in the long run. There's vitamin C supplements that they could take, but that kind of stuff is eventually going to run out. There's also the amount of fresh water that they would need to survive. FEMA recommends that the average person should have 1 gallon of water per day on hand in a survival situation for drinking, food prep, and basic hygiene needs. If we only count Lee, Kenny, Clementine, Omid, Krista, and Ben, that's 6 gallons per day that needs to be accounted for. Getting fresh water isn't going to be easy on the ocean, especially not in the quantities they need to survive. But even with all of that aside, there's still the problem of finding a boat. As Kenny and Lee arrive at the docks, they discover the biggest hurdle they'll have to face 3+ months into the zombie apocalypse. All the boats are gone. There are 1 or 2 of them scattered in the water, partially sunk in the bay or on the shoreline, but there's nothing salvageable in sight, and it turns out there's more than one reason for that. As they're scouting, they come across a wall of zombies, mostly dead, with several live walkers stuck on stakes in the mass. It looks like they just laid down on each other and died. As they're still reeling from that discovery, Lee notices some movement on a nearby bridge as he is peering through the tour viewer in search of any boats in the harbor. The pair hides just in time to see someone come onto the street and go into a nearby newsstand. Trying to sneak up on the person doesn't work, and Lee finds himself taken to the ground and nearly killed before Clementine, who'd followed him despite the fact that Lee told her to stay behind, yells out, begging the person not to kill Lee. The person turns out to be a woman named Molly, and she is the one who's been ringing the bells around the city, including the one from the opening scene. She does it to draw the zombies, which she calls geeks, to one part of the city so she can loot another part of it in relative peace. She also provides the first mention of Crawford, the community behind the Wall of Dead sitting just feet away from them. It's a place where they threw the sick, elderly, and young out in an attempt to make it through the outbreak, while losing as little as possible. As the lack of boats and reality of the situation hits them, a horde of zombies starts closing in, and Lee, Clementine, Kenny, and Molly find themselves trying to escape down an alley. Everyone except Lee manages to get onto a fire escape, and he winds up dropping into the sewers below just in time. And it's down in the sewers where things really open up. First, Lee discovers the fate of Chuck. He'd ended his own life just before being eaten, and a group of zombies can be found munching on what is left of him. Trying to escape near the end of the tunnel, Lee knocks over a board and discovers a hole in the wall behind it that leads into what appears to be an old survivalist bunker stocked with food and supplies. Finding that much food would probably have been great if not for the group of survivors behind the door on the other side of the room. As Lee walks through the door, he is greeted by a look of shock on several faces staring back at him. One of the people in the room pulls a gun on him, and they seem to think he's from Crawford. There's a little back and forth, and you have to be careful with what you say, because the man holding the gun is really shaky, but eventually, Lee manages to calm the situation, and we find out that this is a group of cancer survivors who formerly lived in Crawford and escaped just before the community started to really crack down on the sick and others. The man with the gun, Vernon, is a doctor, and after a short conversation, he agrees to lead you back to the house where your group is staying, and even offers to take a look at Omid, who it turns out has taken a turn for the worse. While Vernon's checking on Omid, Lee looks around the house for Clementine, eventually finding her in the shed out back. She was exploring the place while waiting on your return, and she managed to discover a boat that somehow stayed hidden away from the decay of society. Kenny, who seemed to have given up completely following the failure at the waterfront, gets a second wind and is able to determine that the only thing wrong with the vessel is a missing battery and a lack of fuel. The celebration is cut short, however, when the group realizes that the only place around that actually has those things is the mysterious Crawford. Besides the battery and fuel, they also need antibiotics, as Vernon determines Omid is suffering from an infection. After some back and forth, a plan to infiltrate the gated community is hatched, and the group sets off in the dead of night to steal what they need. But Crawford is far from a safe community at this point. As Lee emerges from the sewer tunnel they use to get past the borders, he finds a guard that turns out to be a zombie. And that isn't the only zombie, as the group finds themselves being chased into a school building by a whole group of the dead. At some point, Crawford fell. And that brings us to the supposedly ideal community, where they kick out anyone seen to be more of a drain than a boon on resources. Even someone who isn't actively sick gets thrown out if they are seen as a risk. The goal seems to be building the perfect community, where everyone contributes and pulls their weight. But is something like that really perfect? Would you really want to live in a society that wouldn't hesitate to toss you out at the slightest sign of a physical issue? Let's build a scenario. You're a member of Crawford. You've been there since it started, and you just want to survive what seems to be the end of the world as you know it. You're relatively young, maybe in your 20s or 30s, and as fit and healthy as a person can be. The group's leaders, mainly self-appointed people who decided they knew what was best, have passed a rule that anyone who is sick, elderly, or too young to help out around the community needs to be thrown out. This rule doesn't hurt you in any way. You're healthy, you don't have any family that would be impacted, and while some of those being thrown out were friendly with you, at least it's them being tossed out and not you, right? But then the unthinkable happens, and the doctor diagnoses you with cancer, or maybe diabetes. Maybe the illness isn't something that's going to kill you in the short term, but the leaders have decided that letting you stay would be too much of a drain on the resources, and now you find yourself being exiled. And this isn't even a hypothetical situation in the game, it's something that comes to pass. As we work to get the needed supplies, we discover a set of tapes recorded by the medical examiner in Crawford. We get to watch as a woman is told she is pregnant and given the option to either get rid of the baby, which has its own set of risks and complications, or to leave the community. She's devastated, and the end result is that she snaps and kills the doctor, as well as many others, bringing about the downfall of the whole place. That kind of community isn't sustainable because every individual in a given society is vulnerable on their own. Every person is susceptible to disease, injury, physical and mental problems, and trying to build a society excluding those people means building a society where no one can ever feel safe. You have to worry constantly if that little ache you have is just an ache or something more. You have to stress over whether you've done enough to justify your place or if you're going to be tossed out in the next wave. It might be tempting to say that those people are just a drain and that they don't deserve the safety and security of the community when resources are scarce, but it's also important to remember that it could easily be you in that situation. Moving on, the group is able to scrounge up the medicine, battery, and fuel they need just in time to face a horde of zombies brought into the building by Kenny and Bree as they returned with the fuel. The horde had been held at bay by a hatch at least stuck in the door, but that lock was removed by Ben as he was looking for something to help open the armory. With the horde of zombies trying to break into the classroom, Kenny starts throwing himself against the armory door, and the rest of the group lets panic seep in. It's in this panic that Ben finally breaks, realizing how his actions have negatively impacted the group, and he blurts out that it's his fault that Duck and Katja are dead. An irate Kenny tries to kill Ben before being stopped by Lee and others, and a vote on what to do with him arises. Kenny reveals that there isn't enough room on the boat they found for everyone, and you have to decide if Ben should be left behind. That vote, however, doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, and within moments, the zombies are breaking in and the group finds themselves fleeing through the open armory door, up a bell tower, and escaping down a ladder on the outside of the tower. Kenny is climbing out, with Lee and Ben being the last to leave, when a zombie, hanging from the now ringing bell in the tower, grabs Ben. You have only a second to react. and shooting the zombie results in both the zombie and Ben falling, with a split-second reaction by Lee being the only thing standing between Ben and death. Ben asks you to let him fall, saying he knows that's the best way to ensure the overall safety of the group, and Kenny encourages you to let go as well. What should you do? As we've moved further into the outbreak and subsequent fall of society, we've seen a big shift in how we look at things morally. Early on, it was more common to use a moral base in line with what we in modern society would expect. By that baseline, saving Ben would be the right choice. While his actions started the series of events that led directly to Katja, Duck, Carly, and Lily dying or being removed from the group, they were themselves not enough to justify his end. Stealing the supplies would be enough to get him locked in jail for a while, or maybe even given community service. But generally speaking, that crime would not be punishable by death in most places. But in this instance, we have to look at Ben from the perspective of the group unity and overall survival. Stealing supplies from the group put others at a great risk, but keeping the information about the bandits from Lee, Kenny, and Lily made that decision even worse. Had they known about the bandits, they could have made a plan to deal with them, or the information might have been what pushed Lily to side with Kenny about leaving the motor inn. That choice also led to the bandits attacking the group, which brought the zombies that wound up biting Duck. Lying by saying he wasn't the one stealing supplies led directly to Carly being killed by Lily, which ultimately led to Lily being exiled from the group. A lot of his decisions can probably be attributed to his age and inexperience, but those decisions have been so hurtful overall that the group might be better off without him. That being said, most of that could probably have been forgotten in the long run if not for his insistence on telling Kenny about the bandits in such a pivotal moment for the group. They were trying to escape what had become an emergency situation, one that Ben once again caused when he removed the axe from the door without asking someone why it was there in the first place, and everyone needed to keep a clear head. By telling Kenny in that moment, he put everything at risk and potentially clouded Kenny's judgment when he needed to be at his best. Had he told Kenny later, or even had Lee help him to do so, he might have been left off of any potential boat or shunned by Kenny, and maybe even the group, but he also might have still been in the group in the long run. And ultimately, that is why the decision to let him fall is the best decision for the group. He can't be trusted to make good decisions when it matters, and when you can't trust someone, it destroys any positive dynamic that could exist. Even if Kenny could forgive him, it wouldn't change the fact that the group in general will now have to wonder if he's going to say something in the wrong moment or decide to do something that hurts everyone again. Let's say he's still there in a month. Maybe even a couple new people have joined the group, and food starts coming up missing. He's going to be the first person everyone looks at as the culprit. Moving past that moment, Lee lets Ben fall and escapes the tower with everyone else. Back at the house, Omid is given antibiotics and Vernon has some words with Lee regarding Clementine's future. I honestly think Vernon only does this because the writers wanted to misdirect a bit, but he asks Lee if he would consider letting Clementine come and live with them. After refusing that offer, Lee meets with Clementine, who's starting to realize she may never see her parents again. She's been holding out hope, thinking they would be somewhere in Savannah, but as the entire city, including Crawford, seems overrun with the dead, and as the plan to leave on a boat becomes more real, that hope has slipped away. We're left to watch her cry as Lee sits on a couch a few feet away and dozes off. When he wakes, he discovers Clementine is missing again and begins searching for her, finding her hat in the backyard and discovering the walkie laying in the alleyway. As he reaches for the walkie, a zombie attacks and he has to kill it before picking up the device and noticing a bite on his arm. And now, after all the big decisions to this point, you have a decision that takes the cake. Kenny, Omid, and Krista are walking into the alley, asking Lee what's going on. You can choose to hide the bite or show the group. What do you do? Let's take a second to step back into Season 1 and remember what Herschel told Lee in the barn.
Can I give you a piece of advice?
Sure.
I don't know who you are or what you did. Let's say things don't get better back in the cities, or they get worse before they do. You're gonna have to depend on the honesty of strangers if you're gonna make it. And if those same people get to questioning yours, you're gonna be in trouble. But at least you have the common sense to listen to a man giving you advice.
You have to ask yourself how much you trust this small group, the few people you've got left, to not just abandon you in your worst moment. Choosing to reveal the bite means trusting that Kenny, who crushed a man's skull in without hesitating, who refused to believe his son would turn and then watched his wife take her own life before seeing his son die moments later, will stay by your side. You have to trust that Krista and Omid, who barely know you and have only been around for a couple of days, will stay by your side. You need these people to help you because a bite means that you don't have much time, and you don't even know where to start looking for Clementine. Can you trust that they will help you if they know you might not even make it to wherever she's being held? Have you given them a reason to trust you? Have you been honest with them? Been a good person when it mattered? And that's really what this whole thing is about. Why it's important to be moral and treat others with the respect they deserve, or in some cases that they don't deserve. Just like the situation with Crawford, when things are going your way, it's all good. But when the tables turn and you need a hand up, can you count on it? Whether you wind up by yourself or with a group, you end up in the bunker from earlier, searching for Vernon as Lee is convinced he is the one who took Clementine. Finding the place abandoned, it's only a few moments before you hear Clem's voice crackle through the radio, followed shortly by the voice of the man who's been stalking the group. He tells you to choose your next words carefully, and you have a short time to make a decision before the episode ends. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of my favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and in this episode we're diving back into TellTale Games' The Walking Dead Season 1, this time getting into Episode 5, the Season 1 finale. In case you missed the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 5 is titled No Time Left, and that title fits in multiple ways. We open right where the previous episode left off, but with a little more context to the situation at hand. The conversation over the radio with the stranger plays out as we see the horde of zombies from the end of Episode 3 finally reaching Savannah. The man on the radio says he wants Lee to stop hurting people and insists that this isn't a kidnapping, it's a rescue.
This isn't a kidnapping, Lee.
Then what is it?
A rescue.
Zombies are threatening to enter the room Lee and the group are in, and while trying to jack open the elevator doors at the back of the shelter, Lee passes out. He wakes up just in time to find Kenny standing over him, hacksaw in hand, and preparing to cut the bitten arm off. And this is the first time in the episode we can step back into Episode 2 and remember how quick Kenny was to make sure Larry didn't come back. In a way, this changed from make sure he doesn't come back to let's try and keep him alive as long as possible shows a lot of growth in Kenny's character. He seems to regret some of his prior decisions, and we'll get to dive a little more into that as the episode progresses. For now, we have to decide to either cut Lee's arm off or keep it. The hopeful choice here would be to cut it off. Maybe removing the part of the body that was bitten will be enough to keep him alive in the long term. And we only need to look at the Walking Dead television show for evidence of this working. In the Season 3 premiere, one of the group is bitten as they are clearing out the prison. In a quick reaction, Rick, the main character, removes Herschel's leg, and we see the old man go on to survive and be a productive member of the group for a while longer. But that action was within minutes of the bite occurring. Infections have a tendency to spread quickly, and just based on the probable travel time from the house to the bunker, removing the arm would likely not do any good. There's also the increased risk of a secondary infection from the amputation, not to mention the pain involved, and having no medicine would mean that cutting Lee's arm off would pose more risk than any possible benefit. Keeping the arm comes in handy, as the only escape from the bunker involves climbing a ladder several stories up an elevator shaft before finally reaching the roof of the hospital. Lee passes out once more as the group makes their way up the ladder, but by some miracle he manages to hook his legs in the rungs and stay alive just a little longer. Safely on the roof, the group looks out over the city to see what are likely thousands of zombies in the streets. Getting down isn't going to be easy, and doubt about what comes next creeps in as they know Lee is on borrowed time. Stealing a plan to escape from Molly, Lee manages to barely get onto a nearby bell tower and ring the dinner bell for any nearby walkers. Though he barely makes it back to the hospital roof, the effort pays off and they are able to escape down a stairway on the other side of the building. Getting back to the house, they discover that Vernon and the other cancer survivors stole the boat while they were out. As big of an issue as that might be, there's barely time to sit on it as the horde of zombies shows back up, and the group eventually makes their way into the attic of the house, becoming trapped. Under normal circumstances, they could probably just hang out up there and wait for the mass below to disperse. But between Clementine needing to be rescued and Lee being on borrowed time, they need to find a way out sooner rather than later. And this is the second time the situation with Larry comes up. This time in a more direct way, with Kenny outright saying,
Look, we could be looking at a Larry situation here.
Who's Larry?
it's clear there are no established rules yet regarding bite victims or possible deaths, and that lack of clarity winds up causing some heated words before Lee throws a statue head at the wall in frustration. Realizing that another house is on the other side of the wall, they take turns hitting it with a coat rack until Omid finally breaks through, and before long they find themselves standing in one of the bedrooms of the neighboring building. A pair of dead bodies on the bed causes some unease among the group, hitting especially close to home for Kenny as he's still dealing with Katja taking her own life. He's struggling with the idea that anyone would do that to themselves, especially when there are people depending on them. But let's take a minute to really open up this concept. Mental health is an extremely important and deep subject, one that no single video could cover completely. The range of emotions people feel, the way they process and navigate traumatic events, each and every single person is unique. Kenny struggles with the idea of what he considers giving up. In his mind, as long as there's something to fight for, you should fight. But things are never that black and white. We've all experienced bad days mentally. We've had our highs and our lows. In a situation where the world as we know it is coming to an end, where the dead are rising and killing so many, could we really fault those who decided they didn't want to live like that? In our modern world, there are resources. If you're struggling with mental health issues, there are a plethora of programs out there to help you. Whether it's just someone to talk to or something more, we have the ability to reach out and overcome obstacles that might be nearly impossible to overcome otherwise. Speaking as a veteran who dealt with PTSD after coming back from Iraq, I know how important it is to be able to seek a light when everything else seems dark. In that vein, I'll link some resources down in the description below for anyone who might need them. Looking around the room, you find a window that allows access to a roof on the next building over, and after jumping across the zombie-filled alleyway below, the group makes their way across town. A quick radio message from Clementine, while they were working to get out of the attic earlier, told them that she was likely being held in the hotel where her parents normally stayed, and everyone is ready to confront the man who took her. But things couldn't go too smooth, and a reckless bump from Kenny causes Lee to drop the walkie, their only means of communicating with the kidnapper or Clementine, into an opening in one of the roofs. As they're all debating whether it's worth going after, Krista takes matters into her own hands and hops down after it. And things go from bad to worse as the room turns out to be full of zombies. As Lee and Omid struggle to reach Krista, Kenny goes down after her, managing to boost her up before being chased into the shadows by the horde. The last thing we hear is what sounds like Kenny fighting for his life as he tells the group to go on without him. While this could be seen as some form of character growth, I'd say that Kenny jumping down and helping Krista is very in line with who he's been all along. He hasn't been perfect by any means, but who among us would be with all he's been through? If there's enough interest in the comments, I might do a full breakdown on Kenny and other characters at some point in the future. But considering he nearly lost his son on the day we met him, everything he'd been through at the motor inn and farm, eventually losing his wife and boy, and then having any chance of what he saw as the only way out being stolen from under him, I'd say the fact that he could still be relied on to save someone and potentially die in the process speaks volumes on his character. Reluctantly, Lee, Krista, and Omid move on and wind up within sight of the Marsh house. There's only a couple of streets left to cross, but a rickety sign Lee uses to make it over one of them winds up falling before Krista and Omid can join him. Knowing he's already been bit and willing to cross the very gates of hell to save Clementine, Lee tells the pair to meet them by the train outside of town before climbing onto the street and forcing his way through the throng of zombies. It's one of the most badass sequences in the entire series, but just as the action is hitting a crescendo, Lee spots a familiar station wagon. Inside the hotel, the hallways are full of nothing but ghosts as Lee creeps along. A sound from one of the rooms catches his attention, and he enters to find the door on the other side of the room being held shut by a rope. Going to investigate, a noise behind him breaks the silence, and he turns to face the stranger that's been following them. The temptation to lash out is strong, but the best course of action is to remain calm and stay civil. Not only does he have a gun pointed at you, but it's also clear he's been through a lot, and mainly just wants to be heard by someone. It turns out the food your group took from the station wagon at the end of episode 2 belonged to him and his family. His son had gone missing while they were out hunting, and his wife blamed him for it. They were out looking for the boy when their food was stolen, and the loss of that, along with the loss of their son, drove his wife to take their other child and leave. He found them dead a day later, but was given a renewed lease on life when he heard Clementine's voice on the walkie-talkie he had. He tells you all of this, and no matter what choices you've made along the way, no matter how often you try to do the right thing and how calm you stay, the situation ends the same way. So what was the point? Let's pretend the game is real life for a moment. You're Lee. You spent all of this time making decisions you thought were the best for the group, putting Clementine first most of the time and just trying to do the right thing. Now you find yourself sitting across from a man who's telling you he's going to kill you and take the little girl you've come to view as a daughter. Even as you explain your choices and say you were doing your best. You would likely start to question everything, every decision, every moment. Maybe, if you'd only done something different, Clementine wouldn't have been taken. Maybe you wouldn't have been bitten. Maybe you'd be getting on a boat with Kenny and sailing off into the relative safety of the ocean. Sure, we can replay the game, find out what happens if other decisions are made, and learn that none of those changes lead to a better outcome, but Lee can't do that. And we can't do that either in real life. It's natural to question yourself when things don't go your way, to look at what you could have done better or different. But that doesn't do anyone any good. One thing I've done in this series is try to put myself as much as I can in Lee's shoes. While we've discussed the occasional branching story, the point has been to really examine the decisions and try to figure out what is the best decision you could make in the moment given the knowledge that Lee has. We had to work within the confines of the game, following a predetermined story, but that's not a lot different than how things are in the real world. Maybe real life isn't scripted, but we also don't have the ability to do things over or see the end from day one. If you've played the game before, you know what's going to happen. Maybe you've only played it once and you're hoping that different choices will lead to a different ending. Or maybe you've played it several times and you know that there's no hope for a better outcome for Lee. My first playthrough was as the episodes were being released, and I had no idea where things were going. I cut off Lee's arm in the hope that he might live. I kept Lily on the RV after she shot Doug, thinking maybe it had been an accidental discharge, and because I felt bad for helping Kenny end whatever might have been left of Larry's life. As I played it through a second time, and a third, I started to realize that it was going to end the same way no matter what I did, and I started to wonder whether any of the choices I made mattered. The text at the start of every episode was telling me that they did, so why did they feel so hollow? The truth is, just like in life, you have to give the moments meaning. You have to decide what those decisions mean to you and what you want to get out of them. Maybe you enjoy overanalyzing them, searching for the philosophical right and wrong choices. Or maybe you just like seeing each of the different outcomes. Perhaps you want a specific group to go with you in search of Clementine, or maybe you just want to see how angry you can make Kenny or Lily. No matter your purpose, you find yourself sitting across from a broken man who's so lost in the conversation with his zombie wife's head that he doesn't hear the click of the door as Clementine escapes. She smacks the man over the head with a bottle, and you struggle with him until a gunshot rings out. You roll his body off of you and look up to see Clem frozen in place, still aiming the gun at where the man had been. After a brief conversation, you open the door of the hotel room to reveal a zombie who'd been listening in the hallway. A moment of panic turns into wonder as the corpse doesn't attack, and once the thing has been dealt with, Lee determines it's the zombie's guts on his clothes that protected him. Being entirely too smart for her age, Clementine readies herself as Lee cuts the newly dead walker open and gives her a fresh coat of what has to be the worst smelling paint of all time. As bad as it is, the plan works to perfection, and the pair are able to make it safely down the street a little ways before Clementine's worst nightmare comes true. After months of wandering, miles of travel, and enduring so much pain, her parents now stand a few feet away from her, roaming the street as the Walking Dead. As Lee tries to comfort her, he passes out in the middle of the street. But Clem manages to keep her wits about her, somehow dragging Lee into a nearby shop before closing and locking the heavy metal door. Normally, that would be the best move, but as Lee wakes and reveals the bite on his arm to her, it becomes apparent how big the mistake was. Lee is barely able to walk at this point, and it's all he can do to direct Clementine as she finds a way out of the store. She handles a zombified security guard, and you're left to make one of the most difficult decisions of the game. Do you have Clementine shoot Lee, or let him become a walker? Letting him turn, becoming the thing that they've all been trying to avoid becoming, might be the easiest thing for Clem. She's been through so much already, and she sees Lee as a surrogate father at this point. In some ways, it parallels the decision about whether to have Kenny or Lee shoot Duck. But that's why she needs to be the one to do it. If she's going to survive, she's going to need to be able to face the worst the world has to throw at her. She'll have to be tougher than nails and do things that others can't. As she points the gun, looking over the site through a wall of tears, time comes to a stop. For Lee, this is the final act. The sound of gunpowder forcing a bullet through a tight chamber rings out, and the screen goes black. But the road doesn't end here. Clementine still has her own story to live. Before we can dive into Season 2 of The Walking Dead, however, we have to survive 400 days. Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of my favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and in this episode, we're diving back into TellTale Games' The Walking Dead, this time exploring the Season 1 DLC, 400 Days. In case you missed the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. 400 Days was a bonus episode of sorts that acted as a bridge between Seasons 1 and Season 2. We're introduced to several characters here that will play a role in Season 2, and we learn a little bit about each of them as we experience a brief moment in their stories. Rather than choosing an episode to play, we're presented with a public message board with post-it notes and missing persons posters. We get to choose which story to play first, and the layout will make more sense once we've seen each backstory. To start with, we hop into the story of Vince. Right away, we hear someone begging for their life as Vince stands over them, a gun pointed toward the source of the voice. As he pulls the trigger, a look of shock appears on his face. We can tell from the expression that his action isn't something he wanted to do, or even something he can believe he's done. As he's running from the scene, we get a brief glimpse of Everett's drugstore. This is a connection to Season 1 and Lee that really resonates when you remember that the first thing we learn about Lee was that he was on his way to prison after murdering someone. You're given the chance to dispose of the gun Vince used, but no matter how you dispose of it, it's still found later, and the next time we see Vince is on a prison bus following his trial and conviction. He's seated between two men, Justin to his rear, and Danny in the seat in front of him. We learn that Danny is on his way to prison as a convicted sex offender, and Justin was sentenced for running a pyramid scheme in which he stole millions from people. As the three men are discussing their present situation, one of the prisoners near the front of the bus attacks the prisoner in the seat in front of him, prompting the guard to pull his gun. When the man doesn't let go of his captive, the guard fires and both men fall silent. Even with the guard's intervention, the prisoner that was being attacked dies, and now there are two bodies to contend with. Before that situation can be fully resolved, screaming from outside the bus draws everyone's attention, and we see what appears to be people attacking each other in the highway median. But the threat doesn't stay outside the window, as the prisoner that had been strangled comes back to life, biting the guard before turning its attention to Vince, Justin, and Danny. The prisoners are able to recover the guard's gun and take care of the immediate threat, but the calm doesn't last as a group of zombies make their way onto the bus, held back only thanks to the gate at the front. Escaping through the back would be possible if not for the ankle chains keeping the men tied in place. The keys to the chains are missing from the guard's body, and it quickly becomes clear that there is only one way to escape. The chain is hooked through loops in each prisoner's ankle bracelet, with the beginning of the chain being hooked to Justin's ankle and the end being hooked to Danny. You have to make a decision. The only way you're getting off the bus is to shoot one of the other prisoners' ankles, and this is where the backgrounds come into play. Do you shoot Justin, the scammer who took advantage of people to the tune of $100 million, or do you shoot Danny, who is convicted of sexual misconduct with someone who is possibly underage? At this point, there's no way to know the full extent of what is happening in the world at large. All any of the prisoners know is that things are going downhill quickly for them. If they don't get off the bus, it's likely they'll all die. Morally speaking, there's no right answer as we don't know the full details of any of the men's crimes, and we don't know what's going to happen. Escaping with either man into the arms of authorities who will just throw us back into prison would be the best case scenario. But what if there is no more authority? Vince would have no way to know that this event was the beginning of the end of civilization as he knows it. Assuming the worst, the best solution would be to shoot off Danny's leg. From what we know, it sounds like he did something really bad. Something that would almost certainly make him a liability in any group that we might find ourselves in the worst case scenario. No one is going to want a person who is a threat to children in their group. That being said, it's likely Vince wouldn't put much thought into the situation. He, like most people, would assume the worst regardless of Danny's actual crime. If someone has to be left behind to save yourself, Danny would be the right choice given what we know. Shooting Danny's foot off, Vince escapes through the back of the bus with Justin, and the two men disappear into a time jump. Several weeks later, but in the same location, we meet Wyatt. He's riding shotgun in a car being driven by his companion, Eddie. They are speeding down the highway, attempting to escape some kind of altercation where Eddie shot someone. As they're wondering whether they've gotten away, a pair of headlights coming from a pickup truck appear in the rearview mirror, and you soon find yourself shooting at some unknown attacker as they chase you and Eddie through the dense fog. A couple of well-placed shots cause the pickup to veer off the road, and Eddie winds up turning down a back road a little further down the freeway in hopes of losing whoever it was that was following them. After a brief argument about the headlights, Eddie hits something and pulls the car over. He thinks he hit a person, but neither man is sure what it was. After a game of rock, paper, scissors, Eddie leaves the car to go check as Wyatt climbs in the driver's seat in case a quick getaway is needed. Before Eddie returns, Wyatt finds himself face to face with the driver of the pickup truck, who's managed to circle around and find them in the dark. The struggle doesn't last long, and Wyatt drives off into the night, leaving Eddie to an unknown fate. The question here, though, is whether they should have stopped at all. While Vince was only on day one of what could be the end of civilization, Wyatt and Eddie are over a month into the chaos. They've had time to see just how bad things are, and they could be more confident that life isn't going back to what it was. When you know the dead are up and walking around, and you know that you're in the middle of escaping some kind of a bad situation, stopping to get out of the car in the dead of night with heavy fog making it impossible to see anything is the wrong move if you want to stay alive. This is yet another example of shifting moral lines. It would be considered immoral by most people in the modern world to hit what appears to be a person with your car and just take off. We've all seen stories in the news involving hit-and-run accidents, and it isn't hard to condemn someone who left another person to die in that circumstance. But in a situation where society no longer exists, where you are more likely to see a corpse walking around in the dead of night than a living person, you have to protect yourself. Maybe it was a person you hit, but even if it was, there's a likelihood that they were killed on impact and might just eat you alive when you go to check on them. Nearly 140 days later, we meet a young man named Russell. He's walking alone along a stretch of backcountry highway when a pickup truck coming from behind him catches him off guard. You can choose to stand your ground or try to hide. Trying to hide provides an Easter egg from the game devs in the form of an old friend from Season 1, Episode 3. But no matter what you do, you wind up hitching a ride with the driver of the pickup, Nate. The conversation in the truck seems to circle around Nate's desire for female companionship more than anything else, and he demonstrates a lack of any kind of empathy when he stops the truck and rolls down the passenger window to let a zombie reach in and harass Russell. Getting through that, the pair wind up at the gas station that all of the stories to this point have been circling around, and they're climbing out with plans to search for some supplies when someone opens fire from inside the building. It's clear someone wants them to leave, but Nate in particular seems intent on sticking around. They make their way around the building and get inside, finding their assailant to be an older man who was just defending himself and his injured wife following an earlier attack. Nate is intent on killing them and taking whatever he can, and you have to decide whether to go along with him or leave. Morally speaking, even 184 days into the collapse of society, the right thing to do here is leave. The man and his wife were only trying to protect themselves when they shot at you, and killing them to steal their supplies is wrong. You could argue that the old man was wrong for opening fire without warning, but from what we can tell, the attack in which his wife was injured was recent, and he had every reason to think the pair were there to finish what had been started only hours or maybe even minutes before. He was scared and trying to protect what he had left. A month later, 220 days into the end of the world, we meet Bonnie. She's a recovering drug addict, brought back from the brink by Leland and his wife Dee. The trio have been out scavenging, and Dee has found a bag that winds up being more trouble than it's worth when a group of people starts chasing them through the dark, rainy night. We find out through dialogue that Bonnie and Leland have a romantic connection, and an off-the-cuff remark by Leland, calling Bonnie darling just before the chase begins, leads to an angry Dee, forcing Leland to leave Bonnie, who is shot in the shoulder, behind. The chase ends in a cornfield, with Bonnie hiding behind a tractor and taking on what she thinks is one of the people chasing them by swinging a piece of rebar through the darkness and smacking them in the face. But it wasn't one of the strangers she hit, it was Dee. There's a brief chance to talk to Dee before she dies, and when Leland shows up, you have to decide whether to be honest with him about what happened, or lie. Honesty is usually the best policy in any situation, but being completely honest in this circumstance could be detrimental to your survival. Maybe Leland would understand, but there's also the chance he attacks you in a moment of anger over Dee's death. Trying to obfuscate, saving the truth for later, doesn't work though, and Bonnie has to flee the field as the group that's chasing them closes in. Leland stays behind, and we can hear a gunshot signaling his end as Bonnie escapes into the night. And this is where I want to point out that there are so many other options and choices to make in this series. I've noticed the occasional call out about other choices in the comments, and I definitely hear you. My goal with this series is to play out the decisions that make the most sense to me ethically and morally. I want to focus on why a decision makes sense and how I got to that conclusion. But that means that I also leave out a lot of the branches and options that exist, as those options are only known to us, the player, and wouldn't really be known to the characters in the moment. Once we get through the series, covering each episode of every season, I'm going to spend some time exploring the different choices and diving into the branches the devs provided, as well as discussing what other options I would have liked to see in the game. For instance, I would have loved to see some more interaction with Ben and a choice that would have allowed him to become a long-term member of the group. I also want to hear about the choices you made in each episode in the comments. The idea behind this series is to really think about the decisions we make and the process that drives those decisions. Sometimes we think that we're seeing the whole picture when we're really only seeing part of it, and seeing things from someone else's perspective might help us make a better decision. Getting back into the episode, we find the sun rising on day 236. We're back at the gas station, and a small group has fortified it and settled in. They've managed to start growing food and even have a security system consisting of zombies tied up in the back. While the main focus of the story might be the sisters Shell and Becca, it's also interesting to note the appearance of some familiar faces. Boyd, Clive, and Joyce, all members of the cancer survivors group we saw in Season 1, Episode 4, are back. None of them has changed very much, but we do learn that they lost Vernon and the boat at some point. As Shell, you find yourself making some small dialogue choices involving Becca and trying to decide if she can help with things like inspecting the guns for the group. But the biggest decision comes when a man is caught trying to steal supplies. The group is divided, and you wind up being the deciding vote on whether to let him go or to kill him. What's the right call? Letting him go would seem to be the right choice. Yes, he was trying to steal from you, but he wasn't successful, and maybe you just need a bit more security in the future. Stealing in the modern world doesn't normally result in the death penalty, as we discussed in prior videos. But, as we also know, stealing in the world of The Walking Dead means putting the very lives of the people that you're stealing from at risk. When Ben was stealing supplies back in Episode 3, it not only put the group at risk, but also wound up indirectly causing the death of multiple people. Food and medicine are in short supply, and the very survival of the group depends on stretching that supply. But unlike Ben, this thief is an outsider. We not only have to consider the fact that he was stealing from the group, but that he could very well have a group of his own. Letting him go could mean he returns later with friends. His friends could come looking for him, but the risk of that playing out is less than the risk of him bringing them back to where he knows a group is with supplies. Keeping him alive and holding him as a prisoner, or trying to integrate him into the group, has its own set of problems. He would need to be watched constantly, at least in the short term. He's also injured, meaning he would need to use some of the aforementioned short supply of medical goods, and he would be another mouth to feed. Looking at it morally, and considering the survival of the group to be paramount, the best choice here is to end his life. But that choice comes with consequences of its own. 33 days later, we find the group in a much darker place. Several people in the group are struggling with the decision to kill the man, and one member of the group, Stephanie, has had enough. She tried to leave, which might not have been too bad, except for the fact that she was trying to take a bunch of supplies with her. And now you have another big decision, and a question to answer. The decision revolves around whether to end Stephanie's life or leave the group yourself. Stephanie's actions put the welfare of the group, including your sister Becca, at risk. She was taking medical supplies, food, and seeds and trying to sneak away. The de facto leader of the group, Roman, has locked her up in a trailer, and he tells you that this time it's your turn to do the shooting. While the choice to either kill Stephanie or leave, stealing the RV you've been staying in and driving off, is an important one, there is a question that this situation raises that's even bigger. Is being part of a group really worth it? We've seen the scenario play out several times now, going all the way back to the motor inn in the first couple of episodes of Season 1. Things start out okay, then someone tries to take control of the group and dictate things, and it all falls apart. People disagree on how to do things. They fail to compromise, and before long the group is no more. We'll see other examples of this moving into future seasons of the game, but would rebuilding society after something like the zombie virus we see in The Walking Dead really be doomed to fail? The rise and fall of cultures and empires can be seen throughout human history. It's not uncommon to see a nation rise, only to then watch it rip itself apart because the denizens and leaders can't agree on one thing or another. It's the struggle between power and freedom. Let's look at the fight between Kenny and Lily as an example. Both thought their ideas and plans were the best for the group. They fought tooth and nail to get their way and refused to compromise on anything. Crawford fell because the self-appointed leader was making decisions he thought would help the group prosper without taking anyone else's opinion or thoughts into account. Had he been willing to compromise to provide some form of hope to the group, they might have been able to make it through. And that's the key. Hope. When we first meet the group at the gas station, they have hope for a better future. They're planting their own food, talking about maybe having talent shows, and envisioning a time where they might thrive instead of just survive. When the stranger enters the camp and steals supplies, they're hit with the realization that what they have is more fragile than they knew, and measures to protect it have to be put in place. Roman starts running things like a dictator, and the hope that they had is slowly sapped as the days wear on. For a society to work in the long term, the people living in the group need to have a good balance between hope and security. The gas station group had that balance when they were able to do things like play guitar and laugh. But when the hope was taken away by the new rules Roman implemented, and the group started to feel less in control of their situation and more fearful, things started to go downhill fast. I'll be digging deeper into the fall of society in future episodes because this is a theme that we see over and over in The Walking Dead. But for now, it's important to look at what happens after the decision to kill Stephanie. Killing Stephanie makes the most sense in the given context only because staying where there is food and supplies in the moment for Shell and Becca is the best idea. Choosing to take the RV and leave would mean leaving behind things that could help them stay alive, even as bad as things might look with Roman in charge. Their best option would be to stick it out in the short term and try to land in the best possible position when the group finally does fall apart. And the group does fall apart. The next time we see Shell and Becca is on day 400, when they, along with a new group of survivors comprised of people from the other stories, are approached by a woman named Tavia, who claims to be from a community where they can find shelter and safety. But we'll have to wait for Season 2 to find out more about that. What did you think of 400 Days? While many people seem to be on the fence about it when it first released, I actually liked the dive into some new stories. The journey through various parts of the fall of civilization, through a diverse set of eyes and situations, was one that I enjoyed more than I expected. Next week we'll be getting into Season 2, and I can't wait to talk about some of the more interesting choices you can make, and the return of a fan favorite character. For anyone that might be interested, I have a Patreon, and now channel memberships, where I share these videos early alongside some additional content and behind the scenes kind of stuff. I'll leave a link to the Patreon in the description, and while I'm still new to the whole channel membership thing, I think there's a join button for anyone who wants to sign up for that. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.